There's a part in the essay that kind of does this academic, let's unpack the idea of Lynchian, and what Lynchian means is something about the unbelievably grotesque existing in a kind of union with the unbelievably banal. I guess the big one is, a regular domestic murder is not Lynchian, but if police come to the scene and see the man standing over the body, and the woman, let's see, the woman's 50s bouffant is undisturbed, and the man and the cops have this conversation about the fact that the man killed the woman because she persistently refused to buy, say, for instance, Jif peanut butter rather than Skippy, and how very, very important that is. And if the cops found themselves somehow agreeing that there were major differences between the brands, and that a wife who didn't recognize those differences was deficient in her wifely duties, that would be Lynchian. This weird confluence of very dark, surreal, violent stuff and absolute, almost Norman Rockwell, banal American stuff.
It's like when DiCaprio and Lawrence's character go on the morning show with
Right.
Tyler Perry and Kate Blanchett, right? And they are ushered sort of onto stage, to do their segment after Ariana Grande has just done her her bit with Kid Cudi, and that's all like surely that was the joke, right? Like the joke was. That's what led and took all the air out of the room for Jennifer Lawrence and DiCaprio's character to describe the impending danger facing humanity.
Yeah.
But they sit down, and the first thing Perry wants to ask them about are the aliens. And DiCaprio, and the point of sort of what they're developing here is that he has the necessary media training and understanding of the room to sort of like do well here. He like goes along with it, right? But what you notice right away is that it's done to diminish the credibility, right? Like they ask DiCaprio's character about the aliens to diminish his credibility right before he's about to follow Ariana Grande's breakup news and try to tell the world important information on this morning show. And that's Lynchian, right? That is what David Foster Wallace is saying, right, in that clip. That's like the officers who agreed that the wife, should have been murdered because she wasn't buying Jif peanut butter. And I think that's what I thought of as I was watching this movie, right? And I think that those aren't the only that's not the only times that we sort of have that construction of the unbelievably grotesque next to the banal.
Like, did you enjoy the film?
It is startlingly self-aware, basically, and I think that it's really hard to square at this point, like Adam McKay seems to be making media that is not symptomatic of the culture, right? But instead descriptive. And I think that's probably the thing that sets him apart, right? Because I think that a lot of times culture and media can only ever be symptomatic of their particular time and place. But I think that McKay's movies, and I think you could trace this thread all the way back into like Anchorman, right? Are descriptive first, right? And that they, and this is sort of, if and I think this has been true, of The Big Short. It's been true of Vice. Like it was a lot of like, it seemed like a lot of the storyboarding had been like asking Felix Biederman, hey, we need your version of this type of guy. Right. Like it was like Kate Blanchett's character or even DiCaprio's character had been like written by Felix Biederman.
Right.
So I say all of that
Mhm.
to answer your
I
question, which is
Yeah.
that I did really enjoy it, and I enjoyed it in a way that was a little disarming, right?
Mhm.
Like because I'm used to sort of and I because my mind is naturally trying to hold things in sort of a critical
Yeah.
position, and I I think I have some things to say about it, but broadly speaking, yeah, I felt particularly seen, and in a lot of the same ways I did during Vice, right? Like watching
Yeah.
Vice was a similar sort of catharsis
Mhm.
as I got from this movie that's also by Adam McKay. Don't Look Up.
I think it's and we'll kind of get into this a little bit when we discuss sort of later on the different reviews from major publications and outlets. Mixed reviews, I should clarify.
Mm,
And one of the criticisms of the film that, I'm going to try and argue, and Nathan Robinson argues in this current affairs article that we're going to discuss, that, oh, the film was too on the nose. And people are missing the point that is the point. Like it's supposed to be on the nose. And I think that's also something that's like largely sort of indicative in McKay's filmography, like going from Anchorman to this film, is that like each film almost gets more and more increasingly on the nose, and again, that's the
right,
point. So
right.
because that's ultimately the urgency of it. We don't. There's not like a good enough reason to be subtle anymore with your political satire and stuff like that. You know, now it's about just being blatant. With the
Right.
political satire. So.
Yeah, and you worry that McKay's universe basically
Yeah.
uh, is all one, right? And it's actually the one we're living in, right? And that,
Yeah.
and I mean all of them.
Mhm.
From that the world that includes Anchorman is
Yeah.
our world. The
Yeah.
world of Talladega Nights is our world. The
Right.
world of The Big Short is our world.
Yeah.
And that actually on some level there is a capital T truth
Mhm.
that is served in McKay's movies that I
Yeah.
think will probably be appreciated in a decade or two
So,
by those of us who are still here to appreciate
yeah.
it.
We can jump into this article from Nathan
Yeah, do
Robinson
it.
here because there's a point here. Like my only criticism of his article that I want to just kind of address here in current affairs. So the article is titled "Critics of Don't Look Up are missing the entire point." And he writes here, "It's not about Americans being dumb sheep, but about how billionaires manipulate us into trusting them, how the reckless pursuit of profit can have catastrophic consequences, and the need to come together to fight those who prevent us from solving our problem." I want to just, like I said, just sort of right off the bat, address my only criticism here because I think this is important. And he describes Meryl Streep's president in this film as being like, this caricature of Donald Trump, basically. But I think that's just sort of the I don't know, the neoliberal sort of point of view here, but you can kind of just interchangeably use any president of the past,
Yep.
50 years or whatever
Yep.
to put into this context. And while Trump might, be more fittingly,
Yeah,
appropriate here, but I mean,
especially Jonah Hill's character.
right, Jonah Hill's character, but at the same time though, I mean, what Democratic president, you know, has has truly sounded the alarm bells, for the climate crisis.
You're supposed to be able to sort of see
Yeah.
whoever you want to see
Right.
in that, and I
Right.
think that it is a little, and that the reason you can see Trump a little easier is because putting a lot of effort into showing a mostly liberal audience, a critique of Democratic presidents
Yeah.
probably is. It would have made this movie a lot harder to get past the publishers. That's
Yeah.
that's for sure.
I guess my point though is that we have, I don't know what Nathan Robinson's political views are, but I think it's safe to say that he saw this film and only thought of Donald Trump, in Meryl Streep's character, and to me that's also kind of an issue in and of itself because it shows that a lot of people are just not fully grasping that like this is just like it's not just him. This is a larger problem, with who has been in that office for the past several, 4 or 5 decades, basically.
Initially, you see Meryl Streep and you assume, I think to my eye, knowing very little about it going in, that you see Streep and you assume, we're going to be shown the Hillary Clinton presidency on some level, right? And then the first thing you hear is Streep talking about how like she finds some cigarettes in the Oval Office and begins like smoking them, right? And so so there are elements of it right from the top that are supposed to sort of like distract from the fact that effectively, and whether this was McKay's intent or something that had to be in there, and on editing and production, that we're meant to be shown something ambiguous about the American presidency. And I think that becomes less ambiguous as the movie goes on, but from that starting position, you're supposed to sort of be able to see whatever you find loathsome to be there. And I think that what is communicated about the presidency, or first of all, the forces that control it and drive its narrative making and policy setting, but also just sort of a baseline contempt for the average American, right? That is, whether you've got the Trump administration or the Democrats, that at its core there is a contempt for just regular people, for the average American. And I think that if there's one thing that is worth saying as broadly descriptive about Democrats or Republicans in office, it's that. It's a deep loathing for normal people.
I'm going to first start off by just sort of quoting something here from him in this article. He writes, "In fact, I really enjoyed Don't Look Up, but more importantly, I came away thinking that its critics were not only missing the point of the film in important ways, but that the very way they discussed the film exemplified the problem that the film was trying to draw attention to. Some of the responses to the movie could have appeared in the movie itself."
Right.
So I'm going to scroll down here to a certain point in this article. And it's also funny because I had to, of course, go on to r/collapse on Reddit to see what people were saying about this film. And they were already addressing the hilarious reviews of this film, basically. Mm-hmm. And so here's the New York Times. It is frantic, strident, and obvious. McKay's touch here is considerably blunter and less productive than it has been in a while. The movie's heartbreaking, unspeakable truth is that human narcissism and all that is wrought, including the destruction of nature, will finally be our downfall. In the end, director Adam McKay isn't doing much more in this movie than yelling at us. And next one here from Rolling Stone. We are a dumb, doomed species, too perpetually distracted and misinformed and gullible to endure. The world will end not with a bang, but with a meme and some LOLs, and way more concerned with what pop star broke up with which DJ than our own survival. And also, this movie should be any indication a righteous 2-hour lecture masquerading as a satire. As for DiCaprio and Lawrence, they both take turns channeling the voice of the movie's creator, yelling and bellowing and losing their cool repeatedly over the fact that no one seems to get it. We keep blowing whatever little chances we have to fix this. It's a sentiment familiar to a lot of us, so much that at a certain point you want to throttle this movie back and match it decibel for decibel. No need to keep screaming this in our faces. Don't Look Up as a blunt instrument in lieu of a sharp razor. And while McKay may believe that we're long past subtlety, it doesn't mean that one man's wake up sheeple howl into the abyss is funny or insightful or even watchable. It's a disaster movie in more ways than one. Should you indeed look up, you may be surprised to find one A-list bomb of a movie, a slapdash, scattershot send-up that turns almost everyone into nincompoops, trivializes everything it touches, oozes with self-delight, and becomes part of the babble and yammer it portrays. This might have been great fun if it had been executed with some respect for our intelligence and for the power of sharp-shooting satire rather than glib nihilism.
In the sort of initial act of this movie, you have the New York Herald, which is a stand-in for the New York Times, right?
Yeah.
It's got the same font on the wall and all this sort of stuff. You're meant to, like, we're seeing the Gray Lady, on film, and what they do is they try to push this story out in front of the TV news outlets. This is where we get the scene with Kate Blanchett and Tyler Perry that we were talking about before. And because of all of this other context around Ariana Grande's character and all this sort of stuff, you cut to the scene in the New York Times newsroom where they're like, hey, this didn't do anything. It's not trending anywhere. The story's over. You've made us look bad, period. Which is exactly what would happen.
Yeah.
Which is exactly what would happen. That this has been, that the New York Times would, if they had a story like this, they had gone out on a limb and got it pushed out onto one of the big morning shows, and the scientists had done and the story had done less than take over the internet, this is what they'd say. They'd say, all right, this is done. You kind of blew it for us, basically, because that's the only lens through which a modern media outlet like the New York Times, like the Washington Post / the Wall Street Journal can understand anything through. The only framework that our classical media outlets have for deeming something important is basically, does it take over social media? Yeah. And because it doesn't immediately, we're shown how these folks would actually react in that room.
Right.
And that's what these folks are responding to. That is what these reviews are, like, almost without any sort of like self-critique, like reacting to, or any self-awareness.
It's just the irony of critics dismissing a movie about people dismissing facts.
Well, and it's that I feel like if it were my job, like you almost kind of feel bad for like the people working at the New York Times who had to review this movie, right? Because there's almost no way that you can't satirize yourself or be highly critical of your own institutions, right? Like if you're writing for the Gray Lady and you want to say something favorable about this movie, you literally have to critique your bosses. So we shouldn't expect there to be anything like genuine in terms of analysis come from these places on this movie, and that's why it's so much fun to read them.
Oh yeah. So I want to read this next excerpt here from the article, and Robinson writes, "Now, the film takes an unexpected turn, or at least unexpected to me. I thought DiCaprio and Lawrence would have to spend longer trying to convince the president to take the problem seriously. In fact, when the politics of the situation change, the president embraces the mission of destroying the comet, puts together a national strategy approved by top scientists, secures the funding, and it appears for a moment that the problem will be tackled with gusto and in a spirit of unity."
Well, I think that's kind of funny that would be read that way. I think the only way that you could read that moment where Streep's character as the president begins to take this seriously, the only way you could read that moment in the film that way is if you had a stupid opinion on how our institutions work. If you thought that our institutions taking this seriously was going to make a difference, which lots of liberals have had that thought over the last 18 months about the Trump administration, then I could see how you would read that part of the movie this way. But I think that any person who isn't like a first tier beneficiary of American society understands that as soon as our institutions take this seriously, it's only going to get worse. Yeah. And I think that Robinson has revealed himself there by telling us that he read that beat in the movie that way. And I suspect there are a lot of Americans who would, but not anyone who isn't like I said, a upper middle class beneficiary of these systems.
He then writes, "But at a crucial moment, it is discovered that the comet is made of rare metals that are critical to the manufacture of smartphones. Unwilling to sacrifice the potential trillions of dollars of GDP gains that could come from mining the comet, the president instead turns over the task of stopping the comet to a Silicon Valley billionaire, played by Mark Rylance, who is just, by the way, like the perfect like combination of like Jeff Bezos, Elon Musk, and Mark Zuckerberg. It is so well done, so well done on Adam McKay's part and Mark Rylance to create this character.
The only moment that they have this character make eye contact with anyone is when he's telling them that they literally have collected so many data points that he knows how individuals will die. Yeah. Like he's like, he plays this sort of very like drawn down billionaire on the spectrum.
Yeah.
And when DiCaprio's character tries to sort of rattle him, Rylance's character makes eye contact for the only time in the whole movie with DiCaprio's character, and basically says, "Who are you, you pleb? I have 40 billion data points on you going back to 1994. I know how you will die, right? You're going to die alone."
Wonderful.
And it's like that's it. The only thing that could get someone of that ilk and status to even just acknowledge a normal person as real is to utterly trivialize their entire existence.
Yep.
Down to a collection of data points. Because that is the most real interaction that someone like Jeff Bezos, like Mark Zuckerberg, like Elon Musk could have with just a normal person, to the extent that DiCaprio's character is a normal person.
Okay, so the billionaire's company develops a risky plan that would involve breaking the comet into manageable pieces that can impact the Earth semi-non-catastrophically and then be put to industrial use. The plan is endorsed by many top scientists who have joined this public-private partnership. But, and here's the big spoiler, it does not succeed. As the comet strikes Earth, the group who tried their best to stop it eat a final meal together and share their love for one another. But the billionaire and the president do not have to live with the consequences of their actions. They jet off to space in an epilogue. Having achieved seeming immortality, they colonize an Earth-like planet 20,000 years after the rest of us have gone extinct.
Like, it barely does rise to symbolism. And I think that that's sort of, when they talk about, oh, this movie's too blunt, that this part of what they're talking about is that this movie acknowledges that we are trying to land the precious metal asteroid on the planet every day. And that our approach to climate change is, at this point, about breaking up the disaster into manageable pieces and letting them impact the Earth.
Yes.
That is what we are doing every day. And so the problem with critiquing this movie as a media outlet is because we are already in the act of treating that disaster the way the characters in this movie do. The contradictory comedy of it is less apparent because the threat is less acute. But do not be fooled. Every single day on this Earth already is just like what these characters are going through in these last 6 months, just spread out over the next century. Okay. Yeah. And so I think that is probably the thing that doesn't sit as well with these journalists who are comfortable members of the upper middle class is that we're doing this right now. And we're doing it in the name of the very thing that Rylance's character, that Streep's character is doing it in the name of, which is that, well, if we don't act this way, if we don't allow a manageable amount of climate change, basically, then there will be nothing left to profit from. And if there's nothing left to profit from, then we would have to actually rearrange the society around a different set of values and principles, which is unthinkable. It's impossible. And it's certainly not something our institutions can do. To write an entire review that doesn't basically acknowledge that we've chosen the Rylance Streep solution to climate change is to sort of willfully miss the point.
Yeah. I want to sort of discuss this idea because this is a concept that we haven't like fully addressed on this show yet, but we've kind of hinted at, when we talk about, UAP, UFO tech and stuff like that. But a part of me wonders, at this point, do we even have to sort of address that angle? I mean, like, given, what we now know SpaceX and Blue Origin companies like this are capable of, if they're not already developing their own sort of plans, to get off planet, Musk, Elon Musk and Jeff Bezos and these folks, you know, they're not dumb. They are fully conscious of what's happening, you know,
Right.
but they also don't care because they're Elon Musk and Jeff Bezos. They have the
Right.
resources to know that they themselves will be fine in the event of, you know, planetary wide ecological destruction.
Mhm.
And they have the technology to at least get themselves away from planet Earth. And
Right.
you know,
Well, and I think that's one of the things that McKay does very effectively is, I think at this point there's very little question that wealthy folks see themselves this way, right?
right.
As basically, you know, even if it's not in their lifetime, that their descendants are not going to have to bear the worst of what has been wrought over the last 2 centuries or whatever.
Yeah. Yeah.
I think that is something that these folks believe. I think that what McKay portrays about it is not that they couldn't take off in a ship or use some sort of tech to extend their lifetimes or what have you, but that the society that they will go on to create is in many ways like the first colonists in North America or something, where it's like, okay, you get off the ship in the New World, and the only people there are bankers and executive officers and all of these folks who will just succumb to the elements immediately, right? Who will not have the skill set or the willingness to suffer in the way that individuals will have to suffer in order to start a new civilization.
Yeah.
And so they are just immediately eaten by the flora and fauna of this unsettled world, because much like the first settlers to Jamestown, they are just wealthy people who had the money to get on the boat.
Yeah.
And because there's not really even an element of society set up, like because there's no way that the Matt Damon character from that Mars movie gets a seat on the breakaway society spaceship, right? It's just going to be all of these people who have never really done anything a day in their lives. And I think that's what McKay is saying about the breakaway society, is that fine, let them go. It's over for them. Like, go do your breakaway society. You do not have even an ounce of what it will take to actually create a society, because you are its destroyers. You know, the destroyers of society will become a new society. I mean, it is a death sentence for whatever comes after.
If the destroyers of society get their hands on technology that can be, you know, just as destructive,
right?
I mean, what's going to happen then?
Right.
So
right. They'll be able to do nothing but what they've already done.
Exactly.
And to sort of, I think that's an interesting place to go to, where this other thing I was thinking about, right? So we can talk about how this movie and its impending disaster are just more acute versions of the climate disaster that we have ongoing right now.
Yeah.
I think that it also bears a striking resemblance, and not by accident either in the movie or in real life, to mutually assured destruction with nuclear weapons. This notion that we must, in order to sustain this order, that we must live under this threat of complete and utter annihilation every day, because that's what sustains this order, is essentially the conditions that we already live on and under geopolitically. If you've ever really pushed like a political scientist on these issues, right? The ineptitude of our political systems, the impending structural crisis, all of these sort of things. And especially if you kind of corner them about heightening tensions with Russia and China and these other things we've talked about a little bit on the show, they will express to you a deep and genuine belief that mutually assured destruction keeps us safe. that, in fact, it is absolutely essential to the world that we live under the threat of nuclear annihilation.
Mm-hmm.
And this is basically the condition created by Mark Rylance's character in the movie, right? That reordering this is not, or taking different action is not impossible, but it would involve deviation from a world of capital and nation states. And that's not something that is in the interests of the people who are in charge here. And so I think that whether it's mutually assured destruction through nuclear weapons, climate change, or a precious earth metal comet, that effectively what McKay is saying here is the same. Insert your crisis, whatever time scale it's occurring at, and we react basically as McKay describes.
So is there anything else that you want to say in particular about that on your notes there?
I thought it was a very coastal depiction of middle America. I enjoyed Leo DiCaprio's Large Sons. That was good. I liked that the person that we were sending on the suicide asteroid mission for basically no reason was what's his face from
Ron Perlman.
Ron Perlman as like just like this racist, like homophobic guy who we're like blasting into the sun as he's like doing slurs the whole way.
I love in that movie how they say like multiple times, like every time he's just going on one of these like racist slur rants. Like they're just go, he's just from a different time.
Different time, yeah, right. As we're it's so we blast him into the sun. No, oh yeah, or like I love when they put Leonardo DiCaprio's character in the position of saying the line, well, wouldn't you rather there was someone in the room? Because like all of the climate scientists like refuse to participate in what Streep and Rylance's character are trying to do to sort of like split it up and bring it down to earth in profitable pieces. Is DiCaprio, is all of like, as Lawrence's character and all these other scientists are like refusing to participate in any of this. DiCaprio is like doing the Dr. Fauci of like, well, wouldn't you rather there was someone sane in the room? Meanwhile, just like being completely complicit in selling, whatever the nonsense is. That was really nice as a critique of those folks.
Mm-hmm.
I also enjoyed so the meteor or the asteroid is going to impact like in the Pacific, okay?
Yeah.
Which is like statistically relatively likely if you were going to have an asteroid. But even with the plan to break it up and bring it down to Earth in these larger pieces, there's still like catastrophic like consequences for doing this. And at one point they mentioned that the Chileans took $90 billion to let the tsunamis hit off the coast, which I understand that in the last month, of course, the Chileans have used their democracy well, which is something they're known for doing. But you think about the Pinheiro administration, and they would, or basically any conservative presidential administration in Chile would definitely take like under $1 trillion to let that happen to their country. That is like, I wasn't ready to have the Chilean right accurately described in Adam McKay's movie, but they did it. The Chilean right would take under $100 billion to get hit by a tsunami for the United States and its capital. That is the Chilean right. Perfectly described.
This is an independently produced podcast. You can follow us on Twitter at COINTELPROPod and support more of our work on our Patreon page. The link is in the show notes and in our Twitter bio. We'll see you next week on COINTELPRO.